The war was not going well. My enemy, a beige behemoth of plastic and broken dreams designated Xerox Work Center 7855I, had launched a surprise offensive. It had taken my expense report hostage, crumpled it into an accordion of defeat, and was now blinking a single, taunting red light at me. The light didn't say, "Paper jam." It said, "I am the master of this cubicle, and your soul is forfeit." It was 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The air in the Bio-Response Solutions office hummed with the quiet desperation of middle management. Outside, the sun was probably shining. Inside, fluorescent lights bleached all color and hope from the world. I was deep in the trenches, armed with a lukewarm coffee and a rapidly dwindling will to live, trying to justify to corporate why a Glimmer Sheen hot tub decon kit was a necessary business expense. Pro tip: when a C-list reality TV star has a fondue incident in their jacuzzi, you don't ask questions. You just bill for the Glimmer Sheen kit and pray the paperwork goes through. Which it wasn't, because the printer was a demon birthed from the ninth circle of IT hell. I was contemplating a tactical retreat, or possibly arson, when the bat phone rang. It wasn't a bat phone, of course. It was a ruggedized, bright yellow Sonim XP8 that my boss, Henderson, insisted we call the Emergency Response Communicator. Henderson was a man who believed that naming things with more syllables made them more important. He also had a poster of a soaring eagle in his office with the caption, "Teamwork, it's all about the wee eagle." I called the phone the bat phone because it only rang when the world had decided to get weird, and my presence was required to unweird it, for a hefty fee, of course. I swiped the screen. "Miller." "Mr. Alex Miller?" The voice was female, taut with stress, but meticulously professional. The kind of voice that color codes its panic attacks. "This is Dr. Eris Evans, Chief Administrator at Northwood General Hospital." "Dr. Evans," I said, leaning back in my chair. My chair squeaked in protest. "What can Bioresponse do for you? Clogged drain? Unfortunate incident in the cafeteria's chili?" A beat of silence. "Mr. Miller, we have a situation. A deliberate act of, let's call it unauthorized atmospheric modification in our surgical wing's HVAC system." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Unauthorized atmospheric modification. Lady, just say someone clogged your vents." My mind immediately went to the usual culprits. Disgruntled janitor, a well-aimed potato, maybe a flock of pigeons who'd met their maker in the air intake. This was shaping up to be a glorious 2-hour job, max. Just enough to get me out of the office and away from Henderson's Eagles, but home in time for dinner. "I'm tracking," I said. "Is the system offline?" "Completely," she said, her voice tightening further. "The police have a suspect in custody. They believe she used a chemical agent." My spine straightened. The squeak from my chair suddenly sounded very loud in the quiet office. The word chemical is a magic word in my line of work. It's the word that separates a simple nuisance call from a full-blown, wallet-draining headline-making event. It's the word that pays for my mortgage and my therapist. "A chemical agent?" I repeated, my tone shedding its bored office drone skin and putting on its concerned professional costume. "Can you be more specific?" "I can't. It's noxious. We've had to evacuate the entire wing." Then she delivered the hook, the line, the sinker, and the whole damn fishing boat. "The entire wing is compromised, and we have 3 critical surgeries scheduled in the next 6 hours. One is a pediatric cardiac patient. We can't move him." And there it was, the trifecta of terror for any administrator. A ticking clock, a high-stakes medical emergency, and a child in peril. For me, it was the trifecta of a very, very long day. I stood up, the chair forgotten. My gaze fell on the smug, blinking red light of the printer. The war could wait. A new, far more idiotic battle had just begun. "I'm on my way, Doctor," I said, my voice now calm and steady. It's a tone I've perfected over the years. It says, I am in control of this chaos. Internally, I was screaming. "Don't let anyone who isn't law enforcement near that wing. I'll be there in 20. I hung up before she could ask any more questions. I grabbed my go-bag from under my desk, a sturdy backpack containing a multi-tool, a high-powered flashlight, spare batteries, a respirator, and a flask of surprisingly good whiskey for post-incident debriefings. I gave the Xerox machine a final, hateful glare. "You win this round, you paper-munching demon," I muttered. As I strode out of the cubicle farm, past the motivational posters and the soul-crushing beige, I pulled out the bat phone again. I hit the speed dial for the EET group chat. The call connected, and I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Leo, Maria, Dave, spin up the EET, we've got a code, absurdity at Northwood General." There was a pause, and then Maria's voice, buzzing with excitement, came through. "Code, absurdity? Is it organic or synthetic?" "I don't know yet," I said, pushing through the front doors of the office building and into the shockingly bright afternoon. "But I have a feeling it's going to be really, really stupid." 20 minutes later, I was pulling my very practical, very boring sedan into the maelstrom that was the Northwood General Hospital parking lot. The place was a circus, and I was apparently the headlining clown. Two of Northwood's finest had their cruisers parked at angles that suggested they'd been trained by Michael Bay. Yellow police tape, fluttering like sad party streamers, cordoned off the entire west entrance. A small crowd of ghouls, a mix of hospital visitors and random passers-by who'd smelled drama, was being held back by a baby-faced cop who looked like he should be worrying about prom, not a potential hazmat situation. I parked in a spot reserved for expectant mothers, figuring this situation was the birth of a whole new kind of headache, so it was thematically appropriate. I flashed my bio-response ID at the rookie. It had my picture, where I looked vaguely constipated, and the words Environmental Hazard Mitigation Specialist, which was Henderson's 5-syllable way of saying janitor for Armageddon. The rookie, whose name tag read Davis, nodded nervously and lifted the tape. "Go on through, sir. Detective Miller is waiting for you by the doors." "Miller?" I sighed. Of course he is. Detective Miller. No relation. A fact we were both profoundly tired of establishing, was exactly where Davis said he'd be. He was leaning against a brick pillar, nursing a large styrofoam cup of what I knew from experience was burnt gas station coffee. Miller was a caricature of a jaded cop. Rumpled suit, tie loosened, a facial expression permanently fixed between disappointment and exhaustion. He saw me coming and didn't even bother to stand up straight. "So you're the hazmat guy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Let me guess, you're gonna tell me we all have to burn our clothes." "Only if you want to," I replied, stopping in front of him. "I'd start with the socks, though. They look like a biohazard all on their own." "So, who's our little eco-terrorist? Did somebody's science fair project get out of hand?" Miller grunted and jerked a thumb toward the back of his squad car. "Take a look for yourself." I followed his gaze. And there, in the back of a police cruiser, sat the architect of my ruined afternoon. She was a woman in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, dressed in a pristine, blindingly white tennis outfit. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail. Her face, framed by the car window, was a mask of pure, unadulterated indignation. She wasn't scared. She wasn't remorseful. She looked like she'd just been served the wrong kind of sparkling water at the country club. She was currently complaining to Officer Davis, who was dutifully writing in his notepad. I could hear her sharp, piercing voice even from 30 feet away. "Bites. And I'm telling you, these handcuffs are pinching my wrists. They are clearly not hypoallergenic, and this is going to cause a rash. I am extremely sensitive to nickel alloys." I turned back to Miller, my eyebrows raised. "Her? She looks like she's about to file a formal complaint about the thread count of the prison sheets." "That's Carol Ann Perkins," Miller said, taking a long, slow sip of his terrible coffee. "President, founder, and supreme overlord of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. And for the last 3 months, the single biggest pain in this department's ass." I leaned against the wall next to him. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a mosaic of pure, unadulterated stupidity. "Let me guess. The new construction." I gestured to the half-finished steel skeleton of a building rising behind the hospital. A large sign proclaimed it as the future site of the Dr. Eleanor Roosevelt Maternity and Pediatric Care Pavilion. "Bingo," Miller confirmed. "She lives in the McMansion fortress that backs up to the hospital lot. Been waging a one-woman war since they broke ground. Noise complaints, zoning challenges, petitions to declare the construction site a protected habitat for an endangered species of garden slug. You name it, she's filed it. And today she decided to escalate from paperwork to chemical warfare?" "Looks that way," Miller sighed. "One of the nurses saw her coming out of a service entrance near the surgical wing about an hour ago. 5 minutes later, people started complaining about a god-awful smell, and the air vents started spewing, well, I'm not sure what. Smells like a dumpster fire at a shrimp festival." I looked back at Carol Ann Perkins. She was now lecturing Davis on proper posture. This wasn't a criminal mastermind. This was something far, far worse. This was a Karen who had achieved her final form. A weaponized sense of entitlement had been unleashed on Northwood General, and I was the poor schmuck who had to clean it up. My own personal bat phone, the EET van, pulled up to the curb then, its diesel engine a comforting rumble. The side door slid open. The cavalry had arrived, or at least my specific brand of weirdo cavalry. "All right, Miller," I said, pushing off the wall. "Keep your Karen on ice. I'm going to go get my guys dressed up in plastic and see just how badly she ruined my Tuesday." Miller just grunted and took another sip of coffee. "Have fun in there." I had a sinking feeling that fun was not going to be the operative word. The EET van is a marvel of engineering, a rolling testament to what you can do with an unlimited budget and a healthy dose of paranoia. On the outside, it's a nondescript black Mercedes Sprinter. On the inside, it's a mobile command center, laboratory, and high-tech locker room. As I approached, the 3 people who made my job both possible and infinitely more bizarre were already in motion. Dave was the first one I saw. He was methodically unlatching a series of exterior compartments, revealing racks of neatly organized gear. Dave is 60 years old, with a face like a roadmap of every bad decision he's ever seen someone else make. He'd spent 20 years in the Navy as a damage controlman and had forgotten more about jury-rigging broken equipment than most engineers ever learn. He communicated mostly in grunts and monosyllabic statements, but when Dave said something was good, you could bet your life on it. Right now, he was cleaning his fingernails with a frighteningly sharp utility knife, his expression completely placid. To Dave, a chemically compromised hospital wing was no different than a leaky pipe on a destroyer. It was just another problem to be solved. Then there was Maria. Dr. Maria Flores, PhD in organic chemistry, and the single most enthusiastic person I've ever met about things that can kill you. She was already inside the van, her back to me, surrounded by the glow of monitors. She was calibrating a handheld mass spectrometer, her movements quick and precise. She had her dark hair tied up in a messy bun, and she was humming. Humming. In the face of a potential biohazard. For Maria, a situation like this wasn't a crisis. It was a pop quiz, a chance to encounter a novel compound interaction in the wild. She found beauty in toxicity, and it was equal parts brilliant and terrifying. "What's the initial report from the inside?" she asked without turning around. "Anything fun? Halogens, volatile organic compounds? Please say VOCs." "I'm hoping for weaponized potpourri, but we'll see," I said, stepping up into the van. The last member of the trio was Leo. Leo was 22, looked about 16, and possessed the kind of casual technological wizardry that made me feel like a caveman trying to operate a microwave. He was slouched in a chair, his eyes glued to a tablet displaying a shimmering, three-dimensional blueprint of the hospital. He had probably hacked into the County Planning Commission's servers on the drive over. "Got the HVAC schematics," Leo announced, not looking up. "System is a VAV, variable air volume, with a central AHU. Standard stuff, but the surgical wing has its own dedicated loop with HEPA filtration. Whoever did this knew exactly which junction to hit to cause maximum disruption. It's almost elegant." "The suspect is a 60-year-old HOA president who was worried about her poodle," I said. Leo finally looked up, blinking. "Oh, well, never mind the elegant part then." I clapped my hands together. "All right, team, listen up. Here's the deal." I gave them the rundown. Carol Ann Perkins, the noise complaints, the vague but noxious smell, the compromised surgical wing, and the ticking clock for the pediatric surgery. Maria's eyes lit up at the mention of a homemade agent. "Fascinating. The sheer amateur ingenuity. The potential for unstable reactions is immense," Dave grunted, which I interpreted as, "Amateurs are dangerous and make a mess." Leo was already tracing airflow patterns on his tablet with a stylus. "Okay, the key junction seems to be in Maintenance Corridor 3C, just above the main OR suite. It's the choke point for the whole subsystem. If we're going to find ground zero, that's it." "Good," I said. "Let's get dressed. Level B suits, full-face respirators with VOC cartridges just to be safe. I don't want to be breathing in eau de angry rich lady for the rest of the day. Leo, you've got point with the drone. Maria, bring your sampling kit. I want to know what fresh hell we're dealing with. Dave, bring the big toolkit. Something tells me we're going to have to open something that doesn't want to be opened." Dave gave a single, sharp nod, already selecting a pry bar that looked like it could open a bank vault. Maria was carefully packing vials and swabs into a case, a beatific smile on her face. Leo was charging the battery on a drone that looked like a futuristic metal serpent. This was my team. A grizzled old sailor, a mad scientist, and a tech prodigy. We were the weirdest, most dysfunctional, and absolute best cleanup crew on the planet. And we were about to go crawling through the guts of a hospital to fight a monster made of spite and, apparently, bad smells. "All right," I said, grabbing my own suit. "Let's go see the wizard." Getting into a Level B hazmat suit is a uniquely humbling experience. It's a multi-layered process of stepping into a glorified plastic onesie, zipping it up until you feel like a shrink-wrapped sausage, and then strapping a respirator to your face that makes you sound like Darth Vader with a head cold. The world becomes a muffled, plastic-scented bubble. Every breath is a conscious effort, a loud mechanical rasp in your own ears. You start sweating instantly, and there is absolutely nowhere for it to go. Suited up, we looked like a budget version of the Ghostbusters as we trooped through the silent, abandoned corridors of the surgical wing. The air here was still, thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else. Something deeply unpleasant that lurked underneath. Detective Miller had described it as a dumpster fire at a shrimp festival, and he wasn't wrong. There was a sour, vaguely fishy note, mixed with an acrid chemical tang and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like cheap perfume. Leo led the way, his eyes on his tablet, which was streaming a live feed from his snake drone. The drone, which he'd named Nagini, slithered ahead of us, its LED headlight cutting a path through the gloom. We reached Maintenance Corridor 3C, a grim, windowless hallway lined with pipes and junction boxes. "This is it," Leo's voice crackled over our helmet radios. "The main trunk line is directly above us. Access panel should be right here." He pointed to a square panel in the ceiling, secured with 4 large bolts. Dave didn't need to be told twice. He produced the aforementioned pry bar, and with a grunt and a screech of protesting metal, the panel popped open. A wave of the foul air washed over us, intensified. Even through the filters of our respirators, the stench was gag-inducing. Maria took a step closer, holding up her air sampler. "Whoa!" Her voice fizzed with excitement. "I'm getting readings all over the place. Sulfur compounds, ammonia, a weird spike in esters, and is that metallic particulate?" "Let's get a visual," I said. Leo expertly maneuvered Nagini up into the dark opening. The view on his tablet shifted to the interior of the ventilation shaft. It was a metal cavern, about 4 feet square, coated in a layer of dust. The drone's light cut through the darkness, moving deeper into the shaft. "Moving toward the junction," Leo narrated. "About 20 feet in, I'm seeing an obstruction." On the screen, a large, grotesque mass appeared. It was a lumpy, yellowish blob that completely blocked the duct. It looked like a cancerous growth, wedged into the point where 2 smaller ducts fed into the main trunk. It was glistening under the drone's light. "That's our problem," I said. "Dave, can you get that panel off the junction itself?" Getting to the junction required setting up a small scaffold. Dave had it assembled in under 3 minutes. He clambered up, a power wrench in his hand, and began working on the access panel next to the blockage. The wrench whirred, the bolts gave way, and he lifted the metal plate off. The smell that hit us was a physical force. It was the concentrated essence of Carol Ann Perkins's fury. "Oh, wow," Maria breathed, leaning as close as she dared. "That's remarkable." It was, in a word, horrifying. Someone had emptied multiple cans of that industrial-grade expanding insulation foam into the duct. But they hadn't stopped there. The foam, normally a dull beige, was shot through with streaks of purple and pink. It was glittering. Literally. The entire mass was infused with what looked like several metric tons of craft glitter. And emanating from it was that unholy trinity of smells: chemical, fishy, and perfume. Maria reached in carefully with a long pair of forceps and scraped a small sample into a sterile vial. Her face, visible through her respirator's visor, was a picture of pure, unadulterated scientific joy. "Alex," her voice crackled, filled with awe. "This is incredible. The base is clearly a polyurethane foam, but it's been infused with— yes, that's definitely glitter. And the sulfur and ammonia readings— oh my God. Is that fish sauce?" I stared at the shimmering, stinking monstrosity that was holding an entire hospital wing hostage, an unholy union of home improvement products, craft supplies, and Asian condiments. "Fish sauce," I said, my voice flat. My internal monologue was having a field day. Of course it's fish sauce. This isn't a hazmat cleanup. This is the world's worst Tuesday. We're not fighting a chemical agent. We're fighting a craft project from hell. Dave poked the mass with the end of his pry bar. It was rubbery, but firm. "It's solid," his voice grunted over the radio. "Not going anywhere." "All right," I said, taking a deep breath of filtered, vaguely stinky air. "Let's back out. Maria, I want a full breakdown of that sample. Stat. Leo, map every vent this thing is connected to. Dave, start thinking about how we get this glittery fish foam demon out of here." As we climbed down, I knew this was no longer a simple clog. This was performance art. This was a statement. And I was the poor son of a bitch who had to write the incident report. We emerged from the surgical wing like astronauts returning from a hostile planet, peeling off our suits in the designated decontamination area we'd set up outside. The fresh, non-fish sauce-scented air was a blessing. I took a long pull from my water bottle, trying to wash the phantom taste of glitter and existential dread from my mouth. Waiting for me, looking even more stressed than before, was Stan. Stan was the construction project manager for the new maternity wing, a large man whose default state was harried. He wore a pristine white hard hat and a high-vis vest over a polo shirt that was losing a valiant battle against his midsection. Seeing me approach, he immediately went on the defensive, holding his hands up as if to ward off an accusation. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" he boomed, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Don't look at me. That foam wasn't from my site. My guys account for every can. We do inventory twice a day. This ain't on me." I stopped in front of him and gave him my most tired smile. "Stan, relax. Deep breaths. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to assign invoices. And this is going to be a big one." I let that hang in the air for a second before continuing. "We've got a glitter and fish sauce-infused polyurethane polymer blocking the air supply to your client's multi-million-dollar operating rooms. How's your afternoon going?" Stan's face went through several shades of pale. "Glitter? Fish sauce? What the hell are you talking about?" "I wish I were making it up," I said. "Our initial assessment shows a deliberate and frankly bizarrely creative act of sabotage. We're working on a removal plan now, but it's not going to be simple or cheap." "This is insane," Stan muttered, running a hand over his face. "A hospital? Who does something like this?" As if on cue, Detective Miller wandered over, looking even more world-weary than before. He'd swapped his coffee for a bottle of water, which he held like it had personally offended him. "I can answer that," he said, his voice flat. "I just had a nice long chat with our suspect, Miss Carol Ann Perkins." Stan and I both turned to him. This was the part I was morbidly curious about. The why. Miller took a sip of water and sighed. "It's about the poodle." Stan and I exchanged a look. "The poodle," I repeated slowly. "Her name is Princess Fluffybutt III, Miller said, with the deadpan delivery of a man who had stared into the abyss and found it yappy. "Apparently, the noise from your construction site," he nodded at Stan, "has been causing the princess severe emotional distress. The poor thing has gone off her organic, gluten-free kibble." Stan's mouth hung open. "You're kidding me." "I wish I were," Miller continued. "Miss Perkins has filed 87 formal complaints with the city, the hospital, and your company, Stan. She organized a petition. She tried to get this whole area declared a zone of serenity for sensitive pets. Nobody listened. The construction crew," he paused, a flicker of something almost like amusement in his eyes, "allegedly laughed at her yesterday when she confronted them about their rivet guns." "So she decided to commit a felony?" I asked. "She doesn't see it that way," Miller said. "She calls it a peaceful, non-violent protest to de-escalate the auditory assault on her canine companion." Her words. She wanted to get the hospital administration's attention by making the air a little unpleasant. I processed this. The sheer, galaxy-brained logic of it was almost breathtaking. This woman, fueled by poodle-related angst, had decided the logical next step was to deploy a homemade chemical weapon in a hospital. "Where did she get the idea for the foam and the rest of it?" I asked. "A DIY home repair blog for the expanding foam. Said it was great for plugging drafts," Miller explained. "The glitter was for visual impact." "And the fish sauce?" He paused for dramatic effect. "That was for aromatic emphasis." Aromatic emphasis. I was going to have that phrase etched on my tombstone. Stan looked like his brain had blue-screened. He just stood there, his hard hat slightly askew, muttering, "Princess Fluffybutt," under his breath. I looked from Stan's bewildered face to Miller's exhausted one, and then thought about the glittering, fishy monstrosity currently squatting in the hospital's metallic guts. The problem wasn't just the foam anymore. The problem was that we were living in a world where this chain of events was not only possible, but had actually happened. And my job was to clean it up. My bat phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. "Sample analysis complete. It's worse than we thought. The reaction between the polyurethane and the fish sauce, specifically the fermented proteins, is creating a secondary compound. It's highly corrosive to aluminum alloys. The ductwork is literally dissolving." I read the message twice. Of course it was. Because why would this be easy? I looked up at Stan. "Stan," I said, my voice grim, "you're going to need to call your guys. We have a whole new problem." The back of the EET van became our war room. Leo had the HVAC schematics projected onto a large screen, a spiderweb of blue and red lines. Maria was furiously scribbling chemical equations on a whiteboard, her handwriting a chaotic scrawl of symbols and arrows. Dave was silently disassembling and cleaning a piece of equipment, his calm, methodical movements a stark contrast to the rising panic in the air. "So run it by me again," I said to Maria, pointing at a particularly nasty-looking equation on her whiteboard. "In English this time. For the dumb guy in the room." Maria pushed a stray strand of hair from her face, leaving a small smudge of whiteboard marker on her forehead. "It's actually fascinating from a chemical standpoint. The fermentation process in the fish sauce uses salt and enzymes that break down proteins into amino acids and ammonia. When that got mixed with the isocyanates in the uncured polyurethane foam, it acted as an unintended catalyst. It didn't just get stuck in the foam, it fundamentally altered the foam's chemical structure as it cured." "Okay," I said slowly. "Altered it how?" "It created a metastable acidic polymer," she said, her eyes gleaming. "It's slowly off-gassing a low-concentration vapor that's a lovely cocktail of formaldehyde and formic acid. And that acid is eating away at the aluminum ductwork. Not fast, but steady. The longer that thing sits in there, the more damage it does. Standard solvents? Forget it. They'd react with the acid and release a cloud of toxic gas big enough to take out this whole wing for good." I looked at the schematic on the screen. The glittery fish foam demon wasn't just a blockage anymore. It was a bomb. A slow-ticking, duct-dissolving, glitter-filled bomb. Just then, the van door slid open, and Dr. Evans stood there, her face pale and drawn. Her professional composure was beginning to fray at the edges, like a well-worn lab coat. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice strained, "I just got off the phone with Dr. Chen, our chief pediatric cardiologist. The patient, the boy, his condition is becoming unstable. They can't wait 6 hours. They can't even wait 4. They need to get into OR3 in the next 3 hours, or—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy and awful. The stakes had just been raised from catastrophic property damage to literal life and death. The ticking clock wasn't just a turn of phrase anymore. It was the frantic, desperate beat of a child's damaged heart. I looked at the faces of my team. Leo was grim-faced, staring at the screen. Dave had stopped cleaning his equipment and was watching Dr. Evans, his expression unreadable, but intense. Maria's scientific excitement had vanished, replaced by a look of focused gravity. The absurdity had curdled into a genuine crisis. "Doctor," I said, my voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the frantic scramble in my head. "We understand. We're working on a solution now." "I don't care about the cost," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't care about the damage. I need a miracle, Mr. Miller." She turned and walked away, leaving a void of heavy silence in her wake. My internal monologue, which had been enjoying the sheer ridiculousness of the situation, fell silent. Lady, my company charges extra for miracles. It's in the fine print, right next to acts of God and/or poodle-induced terrorism. But the usual snark felt hollow. There was a kid on the line. I turned back to the team. All right, I said, my voice low and serious. Forget standard procedure. Forget the manual. We've got 3 hours to perform an eviction on a chemically unstable glitter monster. Let's hear some bad ideas. The stupider, the better. The time for jokes was over. It was time to get to work. Silence descended on the war room for a full 10 seconds. It was the kind of thick, heavy silence that only comes when everyone knows that the by-the-book solution has just been thrown out the window. Dave was the first to break it, with a characteristic grunt. "Can't cut it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Vibration could fracture it. Release a gas puff. Bad. And we can't dissolve it without turning the place into a Webley 1 trench," Maria added, tapping her marker against the whiteboard. "So removal has to be mechanical but gentle." We all stared at the schematic on the screen. The blockage was in the worst possible spot, a bottleneck deep within the system. We couldn't push it forward because it would just get more wedged in. We couldn't pull it out from the small access panel we'd used. Then Leo, who had been silently zooming in and out of different sections of the blueprint, spoke up. "We can't push it. We can't dissolve it. So let's pull it." I looked at him. "Pull it how, Leo? There's no access point big enough behind it." "We'll make one," he said, his voice gaining confidence. He pointed with his stylus to a spot on the map, about 50 feet behind the blockage. "Right here. This is a main return trunk. It's 6 by 6. It runs through the sub-level maintenance hangar, right next to where Stan's crew has their staging area. The walls of the duct are thicker there, steel instead of aluminum. If we cut a hole there, we'd have a massive opening." "Okay," I said, "but the thing is 50 feet away. We can't just reach in and grab it." "We don't have to," Leo countered, a spark in his eye. "We use the system against itself. We reverse the airflow." I stared at him. "You want to turn the entire HVAC system into a giant vacuum cleaner?" "Exactly," he said, getting excited now. "We can override the main air handling unit. Instead of pushing air into the wing, we make it pull, hard. It'll create a massive negative pressure differential behind the blockage. If we can get the pressure just right, it should be enough to dislodge the mass and suck it backwards, down the main trunk line, toward the new hole we've cut. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of plan you see in a heist movie." Maria's brain caught up with Leo's, and she took it one step further. "Yes. And while it's under vacuum, we can neutralize its chemical properties. The negative pressure will contain any off-gassing. We can use the small access panel near the blockage to inject a counteragent. I can synthesize a rapid crystallizing catalyst. It won't dissolve the foam. It'll attack the altered polymer bonds and make it incredibly brittle, like sugar glass." "So we suck and blast at the same time?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. "Not blast," Maria corrected. "We crystallize it under negative pressure. Once it's brittle and has been pulled back to the larger opening, we can kill the vacuum and hit it with a short, sharp burst of positive pressure from the other direction. It should shatter into harmless, glittery dust." "And the filters can catch the dust," Leo finished, grinning. "It's beautiful." It was the stupidest, most dangerous, and most brilliantly cobbled-together plan I had ever heard. The number of things that could go wrong was staggering. We could buckle the ducts. We could miscalculate the pressure and blow out every vent in the wing. The catalyst could fail. I turned to Dave. He had been listening to the whole exchange, his expression unreadable. He was the anchor. He was the guy who knew what the metal could actually take. "Dave," I said, "can it be done?" He considered it for a long moment, staring at the schematic. "Reversing the main fan isn't the hard part. The hard part is the governors. There are 3 primary safety governors on the system to prevent exactly this. They'll have to be manually bypassed, in sequence, and the timing has to be perfect. Can you do it? I pressed. Dave gave a single, sharp nod. Yeah? That was all I needed to hear. It was a stupid, dangerous, movie logic plan. I hated it, which is exactly why I knew it was our only shot. All right, I said, clapping my hands together, the sound echoing in the tense van. You heard the man. Let's go save a hospital with bad science and brute force. Leo, get with Stan and his crew. Tell them where they need to start cutting. Dave, you're on the governors. Show Leo where you'll be so he can time the sequence. Maria, you're on miracle catalyst duty. Turn this van into a chemistry lab. I'll coordinate with Dr. Evans and keep the cops from having a heart attack when they see us cutting a giant hole in their hospital. I took one last look at the team, now buzzing with a new, focused energy. We have less than 3 hours. Let's move. The next 2 hours were a blur of organized insanity. The quiet, sterile hospital corridors became the backdrop for our frantic, high-stakes ballet. My job, as usual, was to be the reluctant conductor of this chaotic orchestra, armed with a radio and a bottomless well of anxiety. The scene was pure, cross-cutting madness, and I was at the nexus of it all, standing in the main corridor with a tablet in one hand and my radio in the other. My first view was of Stan's crew. Guided by Leo, they were on the sub-level, attacking the 6x6 steel duct with plasma cutters. Sparks rained down in the gloomy maintenance hangar, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Stan, his face a mask of sweat and terror, was barking orders at his men, who were moving with a speed I didn't think was possible. They were cutting a massive, 3-sided flap in the duct, a huge metal door they could pry open when the time came. Alex, this is Leo. His voice crackled in my ear. The cut is 70% complete. Stan is asking if you're sure about this. I think he's about to have an aneurysm. Tell Stan to breathe into a paper bag, I radioed back, watching the sparks fly on Leo's drone feed. And tell him his billable hours are looking fantastic right now. How's Dave? My screen switched to another drone feed. This one was deep in a maintenance tunnel, a cramped, greasy space that probably hadn't seen a human since the hospital was built. The drone's light illuminated Dave. He was wedged between 2 massive pipes, his arms buried up to the elbows in the guts of a huge control box labeled Primary Airflow Governor A. He wasn't wrestling with it. He was methodically disconnecting wires and rerouting circuits with the calm focus of a bomb disposal expert. Dave, status report, I said. A grunt came back over the radio. Then, Governor A is bypassed. Moving to B, it's tight in here. That was practically a soliloquy for Dave. My third point of focus was the van. Maria had transformed it. Beakers bubbled on hot plates. A centrifuge whirred. The air was thick with the sharp, clean smell of alcohol and other chemicals I couldn't name. She was in her element, wearing safety goggles and a lab coat, using a syringe to add a drop of viscous blue liquid into a bubbling beaker of clear fluid. Maria, how's our magic potion coming along? I asked. The catalyst is synthesizing beautifully, she chirped, her voice fizzing with energy. Stability is at 94% and climbing. I just need a few more minutes to get it to optimal concentration. It's going to be a gorgeous crystalline reaction. Then, as always, a complication. My radio crackled again, but this time it was a different voice, panicked and sharp. It was Officer Davis, the rookie cop. Control, this is Davis. We've got a problem. Miss Perkins is complaining of chest pains. She's demanding to be taken to the emergency room. I swore under my breath. Of all the times. I could picture it perfectly. Carol Ann, seeing the flurry of activity, had decided she wasn't the center of attention anymore and had manufactured a medical emergency. Miller, you copy that? I asked, hoping the senior detective was nearby. Miller's weary voice came back instantly. "I copy. It's a ploy, Alex. She does this. Last month she claimed to have temporary blindness when the city denied her petition to have a speed bump installed. Davis, you tell her the ER is currently dealing with a situation she created, and they'll see her in the order she was received, which is somewhere after the apocalypse." A moment of blessed silence then. "Copy that, detective." Chaos averted. I toggled back to Leo. "Leo, where are we?" "Cut is done. We're ready to open the hatch on your command. Dave, what's your status?" "Governor B bypassed," Dave's voice grunted. "Moving to C. This one's a bitch." There was a loud clang of metal on metal. Suddenly, a new alarm started blaring on my tablet. A secondary power relay in the HVAC control system began to flash red. The lights in the corridor flickered. "Alex! We've got a power fluctuation!" Leo yelled over the radio. "The main fan is unstable. It's trying to compensate for the bypassed governors." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The point where the plan either succeeds spectacularly or fails in a ball of fire and fish foam. "Dave, talk to me!" I yelled into the radio. "Working on it!" he grunted, followed by a sound of intense physical effort. "Almost! There! Got it!" The alarm on my tablet stopped. The lights in the corridor steadied. A collective sigh of relief went through the radio channel. "Maria now," I commanded. "Are you ready?" "Catalyst is at 99% stability. It's go time!" she shouted. "Injecting on my mark!" "Leo," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Start the reversal, full power, now!" This was the moment of truth. "Reversing primary airflow, now!" Leo's voice was tense. In the main corridor, I heard it. A deep, subterranean thrum vibrated up through the soles of my shoes as the hospital's massive air handling unit fought against decades of ingrained purpose and began to run backwards. The vents on the ceiling, which moments before had been silently leaking the smell of despair, now began to hiss faintly as they sucked air in. We had turned the surgical wing into the world's most expensive vacuum cleaner. On my tablet, I watched the pressure differential graph spike. "Pressure is building," I narrated. "Maria, get ready." "I'm ready. The second it's dislodged, I inject." We all watched the feed from Nagini, Leo's snake drone, which was still holding its position just in front of the glittering, foul blockage. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The foam creature sat there, smug and unmoving. "Come on, you son of a bitch," I muttered. Then a fissure appeared. A tiny crack snaked across the surface of the foam. It was working. The immense suction from behind was pulling at the mass, testing its integrity. "It's moving!" Leo shouted. "It's starting to give!" The crack widened. The entire grotesque sculpture groaned, the sound a low, tearing noise amplified by the metal ductwork. With a final, sickening schlorp, the glittery fish foam demon dislodged from the walls of the vent and began to slide backwards, away from the drone's camera, pulled into the darkness by the invisible tide of reversed air. "It's loose!" I yelled into the radio. "Maria, inject! Now, now, now!" "Injecting!" Maria's voice was a triumphant cry. From her position at the smaller access panel, she plunged a long needle through a pre-drilled hole and squeezed the trigger on her custom-built injection gun. We couldn't see it happen, but we knew the catalyst was now coating the retreating monster, working its chemical magic. "It's approaching the hangar access," Leo announced, switching to the feed from a second drone he'd positioned inside the larger duct. On the screen, we saw it. The foam beast, now looking strangely crystalline and brittle under the drone's light, came hurtling down the 6x6 steel tunnel. It was heading straight for the giant metal flap Stan's crew had cut. "Stan, Get ready to kill the vacuum, I commanded. On my mark! The mass slammed into the makeshift hatch with a muffled thump. It held. Okay, Leo, kill the negative pressure and hit it with a positive burst. Just a quick one. Stan, brace your guys. Switching to positive pressure, Leo yelled. The deep thrumming in the building stopped for a beat, then returned with a different tone, a powerful whoosh of air pushing forward. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. On the drone feed, the crystalline foam structure, now under immense pressure from behind, simply ceased to exist. It shattered. It didn't break. It didn't crack. It exploded into a billion tiny, shimmering, fish-smelling particles. A blizzard of glittery dust filled the duct. Vacuum's on! Stan's voice roared over the radio, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. On the sub-level, his crew had pried open the hatch, and the mouths of 3 industrial-sized vacuums were roaring to life, sucking the glittery cloud out of the air before it could go anywhere else. It was over. I sagged against the corridor wall, the adrenaline leaving my body in a sudden, dizzying rush. The air in the vents was still full of particulate, but Maria's voice came over the radio, calm and victorious. Airflow is restored. Particulate count is high, but the main HEPA filters are catching it. We're clear. Repeat, the system is clear. A wave of cheers and relieved shouts echoed over the radio channel. Dave came back with a simple, "Good work." From him, that was high praise. I pushed myself off the wall and took a deep, steadying breath. I keyed my radio one last time. Okay, I said, my voice hoarse. Who wants coffee? Stan, you're buying. You can put it on the invoice. The cleanup took another hour. Stan's crew, now looking like they'd survived a unicorn piñata explosion, finished vacuuming the last of the glittery dust. Dave methodically re-engaged the safety governors. Maria and Leo packed up their gear, the frantic energy replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. I did a final walkthrough of the surgical wing with Dr. Evans. The air was clean, the vents were humming quietly with their intended purpose, and the faint smell of antiseptic was back in control. She was looking at me not as a contractor, but as some sort of miracle worker who had tamed the forces of chaos with a radio and a team of weirdos. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Miller, she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. Dr. Chen is prepping for surgery now. You and your team, you did the impossible. It's what we do, Doctor, I said, pulling out my tablet. Now, about the impossible. I brought up the preliminary invoice and handed the tablet to her. Her eyes scanned the line items. Emergency hazmat deployment. Custom chemical synthesis. Structural engineering consultation. On-site. HVAC system override and restoration. Then her eyes widened as they hit the total at the bottom. This is quite a number, Mr. Miller, she said, her voice a little breathless. That's the miracle line item I mentioned, I replied with a thin smile. It's a surcharge. The good news is I've already itemized it perfectly for your inevitable lawsuit against the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association and one Miss Carol Ann Perkins. You're welcome. A flicker of steel returned to Dr. Evans's eyes. The grateful administrator was replaced by the chief executive of a multi-million-dollar hospital. Our legal team will be in touch with yours, she said, handing the tablet back. Thank you again. As she walked away, her stride now confident and purposeful, I felt a sense of deep, professional satisfaction. There is no justice in the world, but there are invoices. And ours was a thing of beauty. I found Detective Miller back where I'd left him hours ago, leaning against the same pillar. The crime scene tape was coming down. The circus was finally packing up. Heard it was a success, Miller said, looking just as tired as he had before, but maybe a little less so around the eyes. The kid is in surgery. Looks like he's going to be okay. Good, I said, meaning it. What about our master criminal? Miller snorted. Got her transferred to county lockup. She's officially retained a lawyer. Her defense is, and I quote, "This is a gross overreaction to a simple act of civic-minded atmospheric redecoration." I had to laugh. It was just too perfect. Atmospheric redecoration, I'm putting that on my resume. I need a drink, Miller said, shaking his head. Me too, I replied, my shoulders aching. But I'll settle for 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. As my team loaded the last of the gear into the van, I took one last look at the hospital. The lights were on, people were moving about their business. The crisis was over. We had faced down a monster born of pettiness and poodle worship, and we had won. It was just another Tuesday, ruined and then salvaged, in the life of a man who cleans up the world's most ridiculous messes. A few days later, I was back in my natural habitat, the beige heart of the Bioresponse Solutions office. The war with the Xerox machine was over. I had won by calling in an IT guy who had placated the machine's dark spirit with a firmware update. My desk was clean, my coffee was mediocre, and I was putting the finishing touches on the Northwood General Expense Report. It was a masterpiece. I had translated our chaotic, desperate plan into the sterile language of corporate accounting. Rapid on-site synthesis of polymer crystallization agent sounded so much better than whipping up some magic goop to make the fish foam brittle. The line item for forced negative pressure airflow reversal neatly glossed over the fact that we'd almost ripped the guts out of the hospital's ventilation system. My personal favorite was the high-stress poodle-related hazard stipend I'd added for the team. Henderson would probably question it, but I'd defend it to my last breath. That kind of existential stupidity warranted hazard pay. That evening, for the first time in what felt like a week, I was finally able to sink into my worn leather gaming chair. The glow of my monitor was a welcome sight. I clicked the icon, and the gentle, calming theme music of Stardew Valley filled my apartment. My digital farm was thriving. The parsnips were ready to be harvested. The sun was shining in Pelican Town. For one blissful moment, all was right with the world. I wasn't a janitor for Armageddon. I was just a guy, clicking on pixelated vegetables. My phone buzzed on the desk next to me, pulling me from my agricultural trance. It was a group text from Leo. It contained only a link to a local news website. I clicked it. The headline was emblazoned across the top of the page in a bold, dramatic font. Local heroes avert disaster at Northwood General. I scrolled down. There was a picture of my team packing up the van, taken from a distance. We looked serious, professional. The article was a work of pure fiction. It painted a picture of a silent, stoic team of commandos who had faced down a deadly chemical threat with unflinching bravery. It quoted Dr. Evans extensively, who praised our calm professionalism in the face of unknown toxins. There was no mention of glitter, fish sauce, or Princess Fluffybutt 3. According to the Northwood Chronicle, we had battled a mysterious industrial contaminant and won. I read the whole thing, a slow smile spreading across my face. They had turned our slapstick comedy of errors into a Tom Clancy novel. It was perfect. I closed the article, put my phone on silent, and went back to my farm. The world could have its heroes. I just wanted to harvest my parsnips. A week passed. The Northwood General incident was already fading into a bizarre, glitter-dusted memory. The company paid out the hazard stipend without a single question, and Henderson even gave me a slightly less limp than usual handshake in the hallway. Life was, for all intents and purposes, back to normal. And then the envelope arrived. It was delivered by a courier, a large, stiff manila envelope with the seal of a prestigious-looking law firm embossed in the corner. It was addressed to me, care of Bioresponse Solutions Legal Department. I slit it open with a letter opener, assuming it was a formal thank you from the hospital's board of directors, or perhaps a ridiculously oversized check. It was not a check. I unfolded the thick, creamy paper. The letterhead read, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, attorneys at law. My eyes scanned the first few lines. Formal cease and desist, notice and intent to litigate on behalf of our client, Miss Carol Ann Perkins. I stopped. I read it again. It was real. The letter went on, a multi-page symphony of legal threats and wounded indignation. It claimed that while Miss Perkins vehemently denies any wrongdoing and characterizes her actions as a protected form of civic expression, she and her primary dependent had suffered immensely as a result of our actions. And then I got to the core of the complaint. Furthermore, the letter read, the excessive volume of the emergency response sirens, the percussive and alarming sounds of the subsequent chemical cleanup, and the general atmosphere of unwarranted panic created by your team have caused severe emotional trauma, anxiety, and psychological distress to our client's companion animal, the prize-winning teacup poodle. Princess Fluffy Butt, 3rd. The animal is now unable to sleep through the night and has developed a debilitating fear of loud noises and shiny objects. A fear of shiny objects because of the glitter. The letter concluded by demanding that bioresponse solutions immediately cease and desist from discussing the incident publicly and, more importantly, demanded full financial compensation for a series of prescribed canine therapy sessions, a custom-built soundproofed dog bed, and lifetime supply of calming, CBD-infused poodle treats. I read the last line, and a sound escaped my lips. It wasn't a sigh, and it wasn't a groan. It was a laugh, a deep, genuine, helpless laugh. Of course, this is where it ended up. This was the final, perfect punchline to the world's stupidest joke. We hadn't just cleaned up her mess, we had traumatized her poodle. I leaned back in my chair, the lawyer's letter clutched in my hand. The war with Carol Ann Perkins wasn't over. It had just entered a new, even more ludicrous phase. I picked up my office phone and dialed Henderson's extension. Henderson? Yeah, it's Alex, I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. Hey, I'm going to need to update that hospital invoice, and you are not going to believe why. I hung up, swiveling in my chair to look out the window. It was just another day at the office. The absurdity never ends. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.